In this course, we've talked about the intergenerational cycle of hunger, the fact that the vast majority of the bottom billion, the poorest of the poor, the hungry in the world, are living in a downward cycle. Babies are born with low birth weight, they grow older, they themselves, often girls in this case, having babies before they're already nutritionally, physically. This downward cycle continues and continues, where the segment of the population is simply set back in their lives to a point where they never can develop to their full mental and physical capacity to be productive and contributing members to their societies. This is the cycle that we're trying to break. You've learned in this class about the various interventions of nutritional support, food for work programs, support to AIDS victims and such. There are many, many different interventions that we in the World Food Program and the United Nations system, the various NGOs who work with us, all of us are committed to keeping these various interventions going in these communities to assist these populations to break this very critical cycle. This is what you've learned about in this class. Other key issues to consider is the vulnerability in the US and in the least developed countries. What does it mean to be vulnerable? By understanding vulnerability, as we've discussed extensively in this class, you understand better why certain segments of a population in any particular country will always be more prone to the vagaries of problems that develop in their societies. Not just natural disasters, but also the fact that they will have less access to land, for example, to grow their own food. Marginalized community, indigenous people, the disenfranchised, the landless, the illiterate, the uneducated. And through that understanding of vulnerability and understanding how these communities still survive, how they cope, and the mechanisms which they use, you then better understand what they then do in distress and how you can help them prepare themselves for the next disaster, the next problem that they will be contending with. This is something I always want you to keep in mind as you're trying to understand why it is that certain communities are affected so much worse than others. This is what vulnerability is all about. Many similarities to how it works in the US and abroad, and many differences as well. Chronic hunger, acute hunger, hidden hunger. Now you understand fairly well that there's hunger, but there's different types of hunger, and it's important to understand how serious hunger can be for these same vulnerable communities and individuals who are most affected. Chronic hunger, again, when people suffer for long periods of time and it becomes almost a normal condition of life, when they're just chronically, continuously malnourished and hungry. Acute hunger, the quick sudden onset of food, then no food, access to ample calories and sufficient nutrition oftentimes, and then nothing, which is what typically happens in disaster situations. And then hidden hunger, obesity, the fact that diabetes rates are on the rise, that people maybe are consuming calories evidently, and that they will be overweight in certain cases, but that it's the wrong calories. It's not, they're not having the access to the proper nutrition, the micronutrients and vitamins that they need to sustain a healthy life. So hunger again, you now understand what hunger means. Simply that sensation of not having enough food, of feeling you need something in your stomach so that you can be more alert, that you can function, improve your energy level. Famine, a word that you've heard me say on numerous occasions in this class. It's a word that we use very rarely in our line of work. Famine is large-scale starvation, another word that we use very sparingly. Starvation meaning hunger, but extreme hunger to the point where you have been extremely hungry without any food for a longer period, and you start to starve. Your body starts to shut down. In an extreme case then, you go from hunger then to starvation to famine. Famine is large-scale, national, regional, people literally dying in the streets, dead. But you've learned in this class that it's fairly rare this day and age that large-scale famines develop. And this is, of course, very much what we are trying to avoid in the international community, never letting chronic hunger get to that stage, to a starvation stage or even to a famine stage. But you've learned in this class there have been examples in recent history, in the past couple hundred years, modern history, where millions of people have died from famine, from extreme starvation, wide-scale starvation, which has been famine. The Irish potato famine, the collectivization in the Ukraine, in the former Soviet Union in the 1920s, many, many examples where this has happened. Again, our focus is always to avoid hunger situations getting to that stage. But now in this class, we would hope that you have a fair understanding of the definitions and the differences, critical differences between hunger, famine, and starvation. The same with food security and food insecurity, words that are used interchangeably. I've mentioned vulnerability, of course. Availability, simply amount of food that is there in the world. As I've said, we have enough food overall in the world to feed the population. Not everyone would have access to that. Access meaning, again, either physical access where you're growing food for yourselves and your family, may be able to sell some on the side, or you're living in an environment where you are earning cash, or you have another trade, or you're able to barter trade for food, so either buy it or you trade for food, but you're not growing it yourself, but you have the access to that food by being able to buy it, even if you're not growing it. And then utilization in the sense of not using it in your hands, but more of a biological sense of using of your body, being able to take maximum benefit of the micronutrients and vitamins that are contained in those calories which you consume. And you remember you've learned that this is one of the #1 reasons for high death rates among young children, babies and young children, is that they have developed chronic diarrhea for many reasons to do with perhaps poor access to safe water, and the food that they will be consuming, perhaps, if they have any food, but the food that they are getting will simply pass through, and their body will not benefit from that. So they literally end up dying from dehydration, even though at times they are being fed, but they cannot benefit from the food. And then food insecurity, the opposite of food security. When you have food and you are living in a secure environment where you have access to that food, you're not hungry, you have no risk of starvation, you are living in a food secure environment. When you're not living in a food secure environment, you are living with food insecurity. They are simply the two sides of the same coin and opposites.